live stream. Good afternoon, everybody who is joining us in person and on Zoom, and good afternoon to all of you who are watching this on live stream or going to be watching a little bit later. You're always welcome to join us on Zoom. You can find the Zoom on the STS website in our calendar section. So we are, as we have been doing all year long, going to continue with learning texts that were prepared by Rabbi Aaron Smokler from the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. Paul, was there already a session with her, or is it coming up?
Coming up.
It's coming up.
It's coming up.
Do you remember the date to just share with everybody?
It's up. I'll give you the date right now. Yeah, I'll give the date now.
Okay. All right, so let's begin with our bracha, everybody. Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'atzot divrei Torah.
It's nice to have Bob back with us after tax season. It's been a few months since he's been here, and I am going to share my screen so that we can jump
the date for Rabbi Smokler is May 3rd at 5 p.m.
May 3rd at 5 p.m. So if you've enjoyed learning about her through her texts, this is an opportunity to actually learn directly from her. Okay, so we are in the midst of Achrei Mot. Interestingly, for those who have been coming to Minyan on a regular basis, you may have noticed that this week we've been reading Achrei Mot because we're reading it this Shabbat, but even before Pesach, we were reading Achrei Mot before Pesach because we would have read it on the Shabbat last week, but it was the Shabbat of Pesach, and it was the Shabbat of Pesach for 2 weeks. So we actually started reading Achrei Mot in the weekday a couple weeks ago, took a break for Pesach, and now we've continued it, and it's finally going to be read this Shabbat. So the first part of Achrei Mot, the first chapter 16, deals with something that we're all familiar with, the rituals of Yom Kippur. And then it goes into a lot more detail about purification and separation and proper sexual mores for the Jewish people. And then in chapter 18, which is going to be a transition to chapter 19, which is the Holiness Code, and chapter 20 of Leviticus, we have these verses that help us reflect on where we have come from and where we are going and how we have to be going forward into the present. So, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe Lemor daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem ani Adonai Elohechem. Right, God says to the people of Israel, speaking to Moses, I am the Lord your God. K'maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim asher yashaftem ba lo ta'asu k'maaseh Eretz Canaan asher ani mevi etchem shema lo ta'asu b'chukotehem lo telechu. So you shall not practice or copy the practices of the people from the land of Egypt where you dwelt, nor should you follow the practices of the people of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you. Only my laws should you follow. My rules alone should you observe. It says in the last verse, Ushmartem et chukotai ve'et mishpatai asher ya'aseh otam ha'adam v'chai bahem ani Adonai. Right? My laws you shall, and my practices, my rules, you shall do them, every person, v'chai bahem, you shall live by them. I am the Lord your God. Tell me, what do you think about these verses? What comes to mind? What jumps out at you? What's interesting about these verses? You notice that I bolded the words v'chai bahem because that's what we're going to be talking about. But in general, what do you see? Leora, hi, Stu.
Hi. The first thing that came to my mind is that, like a little child, you tell them not to do something, and of course they want to do it. So what came to my mind is Gan Eden, where God tells us not to eat from the Etz Chaim. And of course, what do? We eat from Etz Chaim. So
Okay, that's
there's
wonderful.
too much no in there.
That is wonderful. So in other words, what Leora is saying to us, which is really beautiful, is when we live amongst others, it's very easy to be tempted by the practices of the people that we live around. The question is, how do we withstand that temptation? In Gan Eden, they failed to be able to withstand the temptation. How do we withstand the temptation when we are surrounded by cultures that seemingly act in ways that might draw us to want to copy them and follow them? Excellent. Okay, what else do you see in these verses? Anything else? What comes to mind? Yes, George. George, make sure to unmute.
Better?
Yep.
They give you a blueprint, Hukim, Mishpatim. They didn't say Edot, things you witnessed. I didn't see that. But in other words, I'm going to give you some laws, 613 of them. You got to be separate. They may be around you, but you can't be part of them. You can't adopt their ways. And, and then they go on and on, through the Torah explaining the different laws. But and by the way, they haven't even seen Canaan. You're going to see things and just don't do them. Don't follow them.
Okay, so good. So your comment makes me wonder. Why does it both say Egypt and Canaan? Why does it say don't copy the practices
Different
of the land
things.
of Egypt where you dwelt, or the
Different
land
abominations. They're not all the same. They do different abominations.
Okay, one possibility. Good.
Yeah.
Marilyn, and then Paul, and then Bob.
I'm struck about how contemporary this is.
Yeah.
And how, this has been passed now to the generations, and it's been a conundrum for the Jewish people. And the question is, to what extreme do you go? There's the Curious Joel guys was in New Jersey or New York that are totally separate, or can you be observant and follow our rules and be, and still live a contemporary life? This defines what's the big deal with conundrum with the Jewish people since the beginning.
Very good. In other words, do we need to, in order to be able to adhere to the covenant with God, do we need to completely separate ourselves from the predominant culture, building huge walls around us? Or can we have fences that allow us to enter into the world and yet still maintain this distinct and separate identity that we Jews need to hold fast to? Great. Paul, and then Bob.
I think the referral to Egypt is regarding the slave mentality of the Hebrews and how they somewhat assimilated the practices of the Egyptians and how they were tempted to be idol worshipers. But what's interesting is I'm taking a Melton class in Shemot, and recently we learned about God being a warrior and a conqueror, and he mentions that he is going to, when the children of Israel come into the land, he's going to annihilate all the tribes that are there, and not just caution them not to practice their customs, but to wipe them out. So in effect, they're going to obliterate them. He's going to send a plague to drive them out of that land. So it's so strong. He's so afraid that we're going to revert back to the cultures that we're surrounded by.
It's almost as if God doesn't trust that we will have the ability to keep our distance from those practices, and therefore the only solution is to remove any kind of temptation that might exist, by destroying the other cultures, which of course in reality didn't take place, because if you read the book of Joshua, we know
Yeah.
that's not what, and Judges, we know that's not what happened. But nevertheless, that's what it appears what God is going to do. Good. Bob and then George.
My only comment then kind of echoes everything I've heard, and that is that God has taken us out of the land of Egypt, putting us into a new place as a new people with a brand new mindset that God is helping us learn. And God is expecting us to step up to that new role.
Or God is, if not expecting, hoping and cautioning that it may not be that way, but certainly hoping that we will be able to step up.
Well, there's kind of an implied threat that if we don't step up, we're going to pay a consequence.
That's true. that is true. George.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you did mention building a fence. Like in one of the early lines in Pirkei Avot, build a fence around the Torah. Now, how wide do you want to make that fence? Do you want to, how much do you want to exclude? And it's always a dilemma. You're here, say in the United States. How much do you want to absorb? How much do you want to, keep separate? And some build, a wide fence, and some, don't build any. But
exactly. Exactly, and that's the dilemma. By wearing certain clothing, by only sending kids to certain schools, by keeping kosher, by following the calendar, those are the ways in which we build those fences to protect us from the temptations of the outside world, as Leora said. Rabbi Smokler looks at the passage Egypt and Canaan in an interesting way. She says that the Israelites shouldn't fall prey to the routines of the past, nor be allured by the novelties of the future. And so that connection to Egypt and Canaan frames, right, these are the practices that you once upon a time engaged in. Don't. And we don't know what the future is going to hold, but whatever it holds, can you refrain from throwing yourself into whatever that is if it goes against the covenantal promises? One of the things that nobody mentioned was the last line, which is the line that I emboldened. And I'm going to share my screen once again so that everybody can see it. And that was, hold on one second, let me find it, share screen, lunch and learn. Okay. And that was the piece, v'chai bahem, live by them. And that is where we're going to follow in the commentary that I want to share with you. So we're talking about this word here, v'chai bahem, human beings shall live by them. What does it mean that when we observe the mitzvot, the mishpatim, the chukim, that we should live by them? Well, the Sanhedrin tells us the following. It says, Rabbi Ishmael said, when do we know that if a person was bidden, engage in idolatry and save your life, that they should do so and not be slain? From the verse, you shall observe my statutes and my ordinances, which if one does, they shall live by them, but not die by them. So in other words, what, according to the Sanhedrin, is the simple meaning of this verse, to live by them? Why does it say, why is it necessary today to live by them? Yeah, Leora.
I have a question too.
I think that the emphasis on you live by them is we know you can do all those things because, just like the Aseret HaDibrot, all the parts that says lo tinaf, lo tignov, that means you can do it, but please don't do it. I'm commanding you not to go that way. On the other hand, on this text, it's the same thing, is I know you can do it, but don't do it, because I think the meaning of live by them is deeper than just life. It's what's inside you. How are you going to live with yourself?
Okay, excellent. So I want to take that last comment that Leora said and hold on to it, because as we move into the next text, the Zohar and the Sfat Emet, I think it very much resonate with what Leora said. Yeah, George and then Paul.
Yeah, well, first of all, we can eliminate 610 laws because of Pekuah Nefesh. In other words, if your life is in danger, you don't have to do that. In other words, you can violate the Shabbos if, say, you're being bombed in the Ukraine or something, you got to get out of there.
Okay, so wait, so pause there for a second. So George, in other words, what George is saying is,
Yeah,
the Sanhedrin is teaching us that the purpose of the mitzvot is not to fulfill them
yeah,
to the extent that we might die by fulfilling them.
yeah, but there's
In
a
other
three
words,
of them.
if our life is
Yeah.
in danger,
Yeah,
then we do not have to observe the mitzvot, because the whole purpose
yeah,
of life is to live, not die, and don't let the mitzvot
yeah,
be an obstacle to living.
but there's
Great.
three exceptions: murder, illicit relationships, and oh God,
Idolatry.
and idolatry. Yeah.
Well,
So
actually,
those you
that,
can't do
This
under
verse
any
was completed
circumstance.
later on.
that's very interesting, George, because that's not what this verse says,
Okay.
right? This verse says that if somebody tells you to engage in idolatry so that you'll live,
Yeah. You say
then
no.
this verse says that you should engage in idolatry so that you should live. That's exactly what this verse is stating
Okay.
here in Sanhedrin.
Okay.
But it was changed later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so there does get created a general principle that George is referring to
Yeah.
that says that any mitzvah we could
Yeah.
ignore in order to save our lives, except
Yeah.
for three. As you said, murder, adultery, or sexual inappropriateness, and idolatry. But in an earlier passage in the Sanhedrin, it seems as if engaging in idolatry to save your life is an okay thing to do.
Okay.
Perhaps what we need to do is read in this that the way in which the Sanhedrin understood engaging in idolatry is different than the later law codes that demand that we don't engage in idolatry. But minimally, I think what the Talmud is saying here is that the verse to live by them means that we should observe the mitzvot only to the extent that it makes our life livable, not where our lives no longer are livable. Who was next? I think, was it Paul? Did you have your hand up? No.
No.
Okay. Rachel and then Marilyn.
Thanks, Rabbi. I actually had a question earlier in that I was curious, what's the difference of rules and laws there? I don't know if I'm mincing words trying to find that, but I was curious in order to think through, how I would answer the prompt. Is there anything in the Hebrew that gives any hint of a difference between rules, laws, or ordinances? And
I mean,
I
not
forget.
here, but there
Okay,
is
that's fair.
there is a discussion in other places on what's the difference between chukim,
Yeah.
mishpatim, but that's not what the focus is here. The focus
Okay.
here is just, at least from the standpoint of the Talmud, it is, do not think that observing the laws takes precedence over your life. Your life takes precedence over observing the laws.
Sure.
That
I
from
guess I'll just add, since I've heard other responses in the time I was thinking through that question, that I'm curious of, like, when it's talking about life, is it to preserve one's continual existence versus having quote unquote life with intent, a specific purpose.
Okay,
So,
excellent. You are
Yes.
anticipating the next comment. From the standpoint of the Talmud, it seems it's only to ensure your existence.
Mhm.
However, later commentaries will expand that and suggest exactly what you are suggesting, which we're going to see in a minute. Marilyn.
I don't know if anybody saw the movie last night. It's on HBO. It's called The Survivor. It's about Harry Haft, who was a Holocaust survivor. He was picked by the Nazis to be a prize fighter
Yeah.
and to fight fellow Jews to the death. And it was that, it reminded his conflict, inner conflict, sort of reminds me of this. It would have been his life if he didn't kill the other guy. And I mean, I really, you know, everybody should see the movie. I mean, it's a really tough watch, but he survived, and he eventually killed the Nazi, but he had to kill his fellow Jew, and he didn't want to do it at first, but to save his own life, he did. He was like for a sport. And then when he was recognized later, when he lived in New York, he was spat on, and his fellow Jews, shunned him. And it's a true story. I don't know if you're aware of it.
I cannot imagine having to make such a choice, but that's why what George said earlier, the rabbis later on codify to say that you actually cannot kill another person
Right.
to save your life unless that person is coming after you to kill you. But in the moment in which you're living, in the time that he's living, under the circumstances that he's living, it is certainly not for me or any of us to judge how you might make that kind of choice in that moment.
Yeah, the torment that he goes through during those times. I mean, it's gut-wrenching.
I imagine.
I recommend it.
Okay, thank you. Judy.
I think they're talking about trying the Jews that aided the Nazis in Israel now
Yeah.
and bring them to justice, which I think that's a real tough one.
Wow. Well, fortunately, we don't have to be the ones to make those decisions. Let's jump to where I think Rachel and Leora were leading us in our discussion, further trying to clarify what is the nature of v'chai bahem, to live by them. If the Talmud gives us a very simple pshat type of answer, don't observe mitzvot if they're going to kill you, right? Live by them, that's more important. The Zohar takes it one step further. And the Zohar says, you shall live by them. Happy is the one who fulfills the commandments of the Torah, for they enable a person to complete his or her spirit and soul in this world and the next. Anyone who contends with Torah contends with life. So here we have something that is not about simply physically being alive and saving our life, but it adds an additional flavor, almost to the ones that, as I said, Rachel and Leora were hinting at. What is this? What would you say is the Zohar's approach? What does it mean for the Zohar to say, you shall live by them? Yeah, Judy?
I'm not sure, but I think not just observe them and live them, but have joy in it and be happy with it.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, what's your intent when you do them? Do you say, oh God, I cannot believe I have to light Shabbos candles again. This is such a terrible thing, but I have no choice. I have to do it. Or, oh, it's Shabbos. I get to enjoy the light of the candles. I'm going to light them and invite people to come and celebrate in my house and have a meal. What is the intent of your observance? The Zohar says the mitzvot should be to uplift, to create joy, right? That's That's what the Zohar is trying to say. You become more alive and awake to the world when you observe the mitzvot in a proper manner. That's what it means to live by them. To live by them is to be attuned to how these mitzvot can fill and fulfill my spiritual needs in this world. Exactly,
Yeah.
Judy. Thank you. Marilyn?
I was just going to say it connects the mitzvot with the spiritual aspect of it to make it a fully rounded act.
Yeah, and I think what the Zohar is also saying, Marilyn, is that if we do mitzvot, we can potentially feel more alive in this world.
Right.
Right? As you said, the very act of doing mitzvot gives us a sense of aliveness. Rachel?
Yeah, I was simply gonna add on to that for me, it might sound kind of mystical or whatever, but I really do see it that way in the sense, I would parallel it, I should say, to the idea of like, having some kind of device or whatever that has an instruction manual. And sure, you might be able to kind of figure the main gist of how it works and tinker and kind of stumble upon things, but maybe in actually looking through how the designer who made the device said you can do these other things, et cetera, you get more enjoyment out of it. So I think of similarly, like, having that kind of instruction for life, quote unquote, in following mitzvot allows us as humans to have that fuller life experience.
Excellent. You're actually now anticipating the next comment by the Sfad Emet. But I think what you're saying is true. For all of us who engage in hobbies, we know that the more that we engage in that hobby, the fuller we understand whatever it is that we love to do, the more enjoyment we gain from it. As opposed to, there may be a level of enjoyment that we might get from something where we just know a little bit of it, but it's not as deep. I can go to a symphony and enjoy the music. I am not trained. I never took classes in classical music, unfortunately, as of yet. I hope, God willing, one day I will be able to do that. And so therefore, when I listen with a very amateur approach to music because I know so little. I imagine that if I studied and knew more, and I went to a concert, I would appreciate even more deeply. If I knew who the composer was, and if I understood their life, and if I understood who the conductor was, and knew something about the conductor and the musicians and all of that. And we can pick anything right in that way. And that's what the Zohar is also saying, and that's what the Sfat Emet is going to double down on in his next comment. Yeah, Paul.
What's the context of the last sentence? Anyone who contends with Torah, does that mean struggle?
No, I mean, it could be, but I think it is struggle in the sense that, can I find spiritual aliveness? Can I find religious passion in the mitzvot? Can I make the mitzvot such that I will feel a dynamism in doing that will awaken the very sense of my soul to the world, as opposed to Paul just by rote saying, this is what I need to do, and therefore I do them.
Thank you.
To really be alive to them is to invest in whatever struggles are necessary to fully grow. So now, how does the Sfat Emet, who knew the Zohar, who knew the passage from Sanhedrin, what does he now add to this? He says, you shall live by them. Through the fulfillment of the commandments, one can bind oneself to life, to the Holy Blessed One, who is the life of life. So now he adds this notion of bind oneself to life. What does that mean, to bind oneself to life? It's such a fascinating, beautiful description of of living. What does it mean practically to bind yourself to life?
To feel connected with everything.
Yeah, be present.
Okay, give me a quotidian, a rote, an everyday example of what that might look like. Marilyn?
Brushing your teeth.
Okay, now how do you do it in such a way that you're fulfilling it the way the Sfat Emet fulfills it?
Being present, just being present, what you're doing. I think
Okay, so we can brush our teeth in a
I
very
could dance with it while I'm doing it, you
well,
know.
okay, I mean, or you can really say as you
Yeah.
brush each tooth,
Right.
right? I am exciting the gums and getting rid of the potential cavities and making my mouth alive so that my teeth will work properly and I will, live in clean, hygienic oral health for many years to come, God willing.
Yeah, but I wouldn't tell anybody. They think I'm nuts.
I was thinking of something like you can look at a flower
Hmm.
and you can enjoy its beauty,
Right.
or you can look at that flower and enjoy its beauty. And you can see in the flower an entire universe. Do you know, I just learned that a fig is not a fruit. Did you know that? A fig is a flower. It's actually comprised of hundreds of different flowers that have grown invertedly instead of outwardly. And to look at the flower or the fig or the piece of fruit in that, what you're saying, mindful manner, is to bind ourselves to life. Now, we wouldn't be able to get very far in a day if every moment of our life was accentuated in that way. But it would be incredible to take some moments of our lives and some moments of engaging in Torah in that manner. I don't know how many of you ever noticed the way that Barbara Claristenfeld during Sukkot shakes her lulav and etrog. Have any of you ever seen it? She binds herself to life when she fulfills that mitzvah. She does it in such a beautiful way where every shake of the lulav has such deep intent with it. At least that's what it appears from the outside when I watch her doing it. That, I think, is the essence of, right, to bind oneself to life. He continues, the Sfat Emet. That is why it is written, you shall live by them. For every limb gleans vitality through the mitzvah that is unique to it. The mitzvah elevates the fixes that limb. Like this, every mitzvah that a person does before the Blessed One, the mitzvah elevates that person and guides its limb, as it is suggested in the Midrash, on the verse, for they are a graceful wreath upon your head, a necklace about your throat. Here he's doubling down on what he says. What does it mean when he says every limb gleans vitality through the mitzvah that is unique to it? Here, what is he saying it means to live by them?
That you feel it in your body as you're doing it. It's a physical reaction.
Excellent. And what does that mean practically now?
It impels you forward toward the mitzvah and more mitzvah.
So at least it should, because if we only can feel fully alive in every single part of our being, our human being, by doing something that connects that part of our body to a mitzvah, then we would want to continue to do more mitzvot so that we would feel even more fulfilled, even more fully alive, even more vital, as opposed to just, I get up, I go through my day, I go to sleep. I get up, I go through my day, I go to sleep. Leora?
I see it basically just to do whatever mitzvah you're doing with a full kavanah. Like you mentioned, candles for Shabbat. To light the candles, we all can light candles, but when you put your neshama in there, it becomes holy. It takes a different
Yeah,
filter.
exactly. So here's how I would understand that, Leora. To light Shabbat candles means then to notice the following things. Number one, the ability that I have in my hands to bring about a flame. By taking a match and striking that match, I create fire. I have the ability, the human gift, to bring fire into this world for good. And then when I light and transfer the flame from the match to the candle, right, and I see the light shine, I may take a moment and allow the light to enter into my eyes and stare at that flame and reflect on the beauty of that flame, the multiple colors that exist in that flame, and the fact that my optical nerve can see the richness of those colors and recognize the gift that I have just brought forth in bringing about the light. And then I may pause and acknowledge that time and the ability to control time and shift from one experience to another is fully mine as a human being. That in the lighting of the candles, I remove myself from the profane tasks of my life and move into a state of elevated holiness. And then I have the ability and the capability of determining that for myself. So that all of a sudden, I'm not just lighting Shabbos candles to mark a moment in time. I'm actually doing all of the things that the Sfat Emet is inviting me to do by fulfilling the mitzvah of the Torah that says, V'chai bahem, live by them. Live more fully and deeply through the opportunities that God has given us in each of these mitzvot. Here, I'll talk about, a mundane one, the bracha that we recite after we go to the bathroom. Right? There is a bracha that we recite every time we go to the bathroom. It's called Asher Yatzar. Asher Yatzar et ha'adam uvaravo nekavim nekavim chaluim chalim galui v'yadua lifnei kisei kvodecha she'im yapatecha harmem, etc., etc. That God, you've created passages and holes, ways in my body that allow me to function. Because if they were clogged, I wouldn't function, or if they didn't close, I wouldn't function. So can you imagine if you took a moment after, right, finishing in the bathroom and acknowledge the gift of our bodies and how miraculous they are when they do work properly, and what that means to our ability to be alive so that we can eat and use the food properly in our body and then expel the waste that we don't need and make room to eat again so that we can use all of the nutrients to allow our body to function. It's an unbelievable thing, right? To live by them. That perhaps is what the Sfat Emet means here.
I just want to add, Rabbi, that example is one of the things when I was first learning more about Judaism that I thought was fascinating. And I loved that. I was like, yeah, just being mindful to be thankful for even that kind of, process.
Every morning I wake up, I say, Moda Ani. What I don't say is, Moda ani lefanecha melechai v'kayam shechazarta b'nishmati v'chemla rabba emunatecha. I don't ever do that. What I do is I say it, and sometimes I don't even get through more than Moda ani, because that's where I rest with what does it mean to admit, to acknowledge that I'm alive. And I say it first as soon as I open up my eyes in the morning when I wake up. Now, sometimes then I go to the rest of it and I think about the rest of it, but I never say it without trying to be conscientious of what it is that I am acknowledging in the moment in which I'm alive. And what does that mean to how I might take the next moment of my life? Not the rest of my day, because I have no idea what the rest of my day is going to be. Just the next moment when I get out of bed. So the
Amen.
Rabbi Smokler, who reads this, right, who brings this, says the following. She says, by doing mitzvot, we align ourselves with the source of life and thereby draw ourselves closer to life, its mystery, color, intensity, grand complexity. In the process of the Sfat Emet, repeatedly throughout his work, we gain chiyut, vitality. V'chai bahem thus becomes a charge to utilize Torah as the grounds for one's deeper engagement with life, with the dynamism of spiritual awakening. As you all said, it's about being more mindful to the possibility that exists every moment of my life. Every part of the body can be called into service through mitzvot, those activities that bind humanity and divinity. Every mindful practice can arouse that part that performs it to a greater consciousness, intention, or wholeness. The head and the throat through thought and song, for example, the arms and the legs through charitable giving, compassionate accompaniment, the eyes and the ears through noticing and attuning. Every single inch of the body can awaken and be awakened. V'chai bahem, and we can truly, vibrantly live. V'chai bahem. What does it mean to not live by the way of the Canaanites and the Egyptians? It's not necessarily about not doing what they do. It's about taking notice of the gifts in our own life and living more fully and consciously every single day of our lives. He concludes the Sfat Emet, and the words that precede you shall live by them. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, Asher Yashavtem. They're similar to the teaching in the Babylonian Talmud on the words God said to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered, Asher Shibarta. The Talmud records, Reish Lakish said that the word Asher that appears in Asher Yashavtem with the Egyptians, that you dwelled, and the Asher here, Asher Shibarta, that you broke, is actually an allusion to the phrase Yasher Koach, well done for breaking the tablets. Now this is a gigantic midrashic leap, because the word Asher and Yashar are not related at all in Hebrew, but they're related in terms of the sound. And Reish Lakish is playing a game in it, the interpretation of those 2 words. We all know the expression Yasher Koach, right? When do we say Yasher Koach?
And something's well done.
Well done,
Exactly,
reading
when
Torah.
Reading from the
well-
Torah. Yeah.
Yes, something is well done. And what does it literally mean, Yasher Koach?
You should be strong,
Straight.
right?
Straight strength. You should continue to be strong. So here in this passage, the Sfat Emet is actually doing something very interesting. He's saying that God said to Moshe, well done for breaking the tablets. And that's connected somehow. The shattering of the tablets is connected to the verse that says, you shall not practice the way that you practiced in the land of Egypt. What is the connection between those? Yeah, Ziggy.
The golden calf and that kind of stuff. But I think it's a stretch. It's a stretch to try to make a point here. And I think the bigger point here is that the Torah is trying to tell you how to live your life. To me, that's the way of the Torah. Basically, teach the Israelites how to live. And by saying that those other items that we previously discussed, as far as when you practice the mitzvot, you're going to get something out of it. So it's not like, why should I practice the mitzvot? But here it's saying, well, this is why you should, because it's good for you. You're going to get something out of it, not just because God said you should do it. So I kind of like that. That's slant on it.
Okay, so Ziggy takes us back. He's not crazy about this far-fetched interpretation by Reish Lakish and the Sfat Emet, which is fair. Not everybody has to love the ways in which the sages, sometimes overreached when it came to trying to make a point. But nevertheless, Paul, what's your take on this?
Well, first of all, I would ask Ziggy to stretch a little bit more. I see a great illusion when Moses came down with the first tablets and he saw the children worshiping the golden calf. It was as though they did not leave Egypt. And so they were not of any use then, and he shattered them in despair that they were for naught at that time. And so he did merit, his behavior was meritorious because they weren't ready to receive them.
Nice, beautiful. I like that very much. George.
Yeah, I'm going to go
taking a
the
crack
other
at
way on that one. Okay, he's got the laws. He's breaking the laws. He should break some hieroglyphics of the Egyptian religion. You should throw that down and break it. The rules for living in Egypt, not the Torah. That's why,
So you're not happy with Moshe's behavior?
Well, no, the concept that was really a good thing. I mean,
well, okay, so that's good. We don't have to agree with the way our rabbis interpret things.
No.
And that goes back to Ziggy's comment. Well, let's take a look at how she reads it from here, from the tablets.
Yeah.
The tablets shattered by Moshe are compared to the Jewish experience in Egypt, which nearly shattered the Israelites. Just as Moses was ultimately congratulated for his seemingly irreverent act, Yasher Koach Asher Shibarta, well done for breaking, so our time in Egypt is lauded. It's as if Reish Lakish said, Yasher Koach Asher Yashavta, well done for having dwelled there. What does that mean, well done for having dwelled there? I think, Paul?
It's a sense that we came through our suffering for the good. We learned from our suffering how to be more human. And I just want to comment that Moshe broke the tablets, but was not punished for it. And yet he hit a rock for water and he wasn't allowed into the promised land. So obviously we have to look at some proportion of these behaviors and their consequences.
Good. Okay. Excellent. Good. But I want to go back to the first comment that you made, because I think that first comment that you made definitely is germane to this discussion, right? Repeat the first thing you said, Paul.
That he says Yasher Koach Asher Yashavta because we needed to suffer to go through it in order to realize what slavery is and then to become fully human in freedom. Otherwise, we never would have known that experience.
Exactly. So jumping down here, if you look at right here, right, well done for having sat in a constricted space and nevertheless finding a pathway to move towards life. Every limb can be an instrument for our liberation. If Egypt represents narrow places, right, the Rebbe is congratulating those who have been able to move through those experiences as a way of potentially growing in their lives.
It's easy for us to say.
What's that?
It's easy for us to say because we didn't go through it. I mean, that was not so good for all the Israelites that suffered in Egypt.
Of course, but what I think he's also saying to us is that Egypt is a metaphor for our present lives today.
Okay.
And there are always... Go ahead, Paul.
We go through it every day.
Exactly.
We have our own narrowness that we have to get out of and lose that constriction.
And one of the ways that we get out of that narrowness and lose the constriction is v'chai bahem, is taking note of what we do have, of living more fully in the world of the mitzvot that we are blessed to be part of, in holding on to the covenant that we've been given and allowing that to become our Eretz Yisrael. Our promised land is every moment that we can live vitally in the moment in which we are alive. And when we do that, we have walked out of our Mitzrayim, our constricted places. And for that, we deserve a Yasher Koach. That, I think, is, is how I would, wrap up the discussion there. We all have, as Paul said, moments of Mitzrayim. How do we get out of those moments of Mitzrayim? We get out of those moments of Mitzrayim when we can recognize the potential for the fullness of living in a moment in which there are blessings that surround us. And the mitzvot are the means to help us get out of those moments of constriction. If we take them seriously, if we engage them with intentionality, if we notice that they could elevate our very existence. Right? That is the true sense of v'chai b'hem. So that's your task, to go out today and find a moment to fulfill a mitzvah with the fullness of your being and really feel as if you are living through whatever it is that you're doing in that mitzvah.
Thank you. I feel inspired.
Yasher Koach.
Yeah,
Yes, well played. Yasher Koach.
All right, everybody.
That's
Have
so
a
good.
great day. And I will see you, God willing, next week, if not before.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Great class.
Did we find out what
Bye.
happened with the sound last night?
Yeah. Hold on.